Welcome to another episode of the Fork This podcast, where we talk to independent local food producers, independent retailers, and also artisans. And today I'm joined by Andrew Knowles from Trenchmore Farm, and I'm super excited about this because I've eaten a lot of your beef. So getting to actually sit down and have a conversation with you, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming.
So we're here on the farm, which is a very active farm, and we can actually, hopefully you guys can't hear, but there is actually some tractors going around in the background. But I wanted to ask, how did all this start?
Well, it started with an opportunity of a parcel of land coming up for sale adjacent to some land we already owned. And I was a farmer when I was a young man, and I studied agriculture at university and was a farm manager for someone. But I decided I wanted to farm more on my own terms at some point in life, and through a variety of sort of steps and hoops, I eventually came back to farming sort of fairly late in life, in my 50s, because of this opportunity. And basically it was a block of land without buildings, without a house. But it was adjacent to land we owned, and we had the house already, so that worked very well. So that's how it came about. How did we come to farm beef cattle? That's a different story, really, which is the land was at that time was arable farmed by a vacant farmer, somebody who lived a few miles down the road. When you farm land from a few miles away, it's very difficult to give the love, the care and attention to the land because you have to come all that distance, with a ditcher or with a hedge cutter or with an implement to do any work. So essentially you do the bare minimum, and things tend to fall into disrepair. So it would be fair to say there were no fences that were worth talking about. Most of the fields were without water, and that wasn't very opportune for livestock farming, but the soil type is the governing thing in this area. So we're farming on the edge of the Weald, and the Weald is some of the toughest soil in the country to farm because it's heavy clay. It traditionally grew oak trees and ash trees, the Ashdown Forest, famous for it, and it's very good at growing that. When it was cleared for farming, I think originally it would have been grass and sheep, and then it got turned into arable after the war, grow more food, shortage of food, shortage of foreign exchange, so farmers were encouraged to plough up grassland and grow arable. And it worked for a while. There was a good organic content in the soil, but gradually over the decades that will have got depleted, and when we took over this farm, the organic matter content in the soils was around 4% to 5% if you were lucky. Today, 12 years later, it's 10 to 11%, so we've effectively doubled the organic matter content. And that's by going back into growing grass and particularly into herbal mixtures and the use of livestock with paddock rotation. The arable I found very difficult to make a living at. It certainly is a business that you need to have scale, but also because the soil was so denuded, the yields were just going down year after year. It was getting more and more difficult. The soil was getting more and more tight to work because there was no organic matter in it. So that was a driving factor in the decision to go into livestock farming. And I suppose the next thing that comes up then is the size of the fields on this farm are very small. So we're average about 8 acres. Most of the fields have high hedges and trees around them. The farm is very well wooded. There's an awful lot of oak trees in particular and ash trees, and quite large parcels of woodland and shores in between the fields and so on. So you have small fields shaded from the sun. They don't tend to be particularly productive for arable, but they do grow reasonable grass. And they're quite useful if you want to move cattle from field to field in small parcels. So that helped form the decision, if you like. That's where we ended up where we are.
And so the cattle that you started with isn't the cattle that you've got today in the times of the breeds?
No. We started with 5 cattle, which were the relative, and bought his cattle. He had 5 Limousin cows. Limousin is the most popular breed of cattle in the country, and it has many virtues, but one of them is not its flavour. It's a continental breed. They're large cattle. They were very popular. They became very fashionable in the sort of 80s and 90s, and still persist as popular animals for supermarket trade because they're a relatively productive animal for them to butcher. However, they do lack flavour because there is very little fat in them, and the fat provides the flavour in beef. So we really felt that we weren't big enough to be, as a supplier to the supermarkets, able to have any influence over anything. We would essentially be a price taker, and we'd be told what to do, and it would be a very difficult relationship. And in the context of that, we looked around and tried to think about what we should do that would give us a bit more control over our own destiny. The fortunate thing about this area is that there are a lot of hotels, restaurants, gastropubs and so on to service the large population and relatively affluent population in the southeast. And so we decided to try and market the produce direct to chefs, and essentially that was the road we went down. When you go down a road like that, the best thing to do, as always in marketing, is to try and get close to the customer and ask them what they actually want to buy. And what you will find from any professional chef is they do not wish to buy continental beef because it lacks flavour. And we wanted to farm for flavour to service those customers. And the thing that they will say to you, and they did say to us, when we went and interviewed them, we did sort of a bit of market research before we finalised which breed to go for, was there were two things they found difficult in the beef trade. One was to get really consistently good beef, and the second thing was to get that locally. And what they wanted to do was to find a local supplier who could consistently supply them with the volume that they wanted and of a consistent quality. And you would think that that was an easy thing to do, but it's not. It's actually a very difficult thing to do. For a whole host of reasons, but certainly it's very difficult for chefs to buy consistently good beef. They tend to buy from catering wholesale butchers who source meat from everywhere, all over the world, and an awful lot of meat that's sold in the catering trade hasn't come from the local area. But fortunately in this area, particularly in the sort of more higher level restaurants, people will often ask, where do you get your beef from? And that helps reinforce, and I'm very grateful to people for doing so, that there is a benefit in sourcing locally. And then if you want to source locally, well, you need a consistent supply. The thing about a chef is that it comes to Sunday night, they've had a busy weekend, they go to the fridge, they have a look what's left, and then they want to reorder what they've sold. And that doesn't give you an awful lot of notice as a supplier to them over what's coming for next week. On Monday morning, you will get a text or a phone call or an email saying, can you send me this, this and this? And so to be able to sort of respond to that consistently and say yes, as opposed to say no, you need to have a reasonable quantity being processed. So that led us to give up on the arable farming and revert to livestock with a bit more scale. And we then had to decide on breed, and we liked very much the native breed in this area, the Sussex cattle. So we'd farm Sussex red cattle, and all our cows originally were from the Sussex breed. As time's gone by, for various reasons, we've ended up with Angus and beef shorthorn cows as well. So we have a native British breed herd. They all provide beautiful flavour, that traditional British beefy flavour, fantastic livestock, and very suited to this kind of climate. They do well on rough pasture, they do well on good pasture. They are a super animal, and docile, easy to look after, easy to handle, and a manageable size compared to the continental cattle, which are much bigger. But we wanted to have something that added a bit of something special and extra, and farming for flavour. We were aware that the thing that drives flavour in beef is actually the fat content. And in Britain, it's very interesting, beef is bought and sold by weight. It's treated as a commodity by the beef industry, by the meat industry. The supermarkets do not buy on quality, they buy on yield, basically, and they have a grid, a way of doing that and assessing that, and that's how the price is worked out. And if the beef is good, bad or indifferent, is really not part in that trading negotiation. Whereas if you go to America or to Australia or to Japan or to New Zealand or to many sensible countries, actually beef is valued on its quality. And we found that very interesting. And when you do a bit of research and you investigate how do they judge quality, it's not the things that you might expect. They don't look at the cow in a field or in an auction.
There's not
in
a
a
cross
market.
equivalent.
There's not a cross equivalent. No, what they do is they look at the carcass on the hook, and they open up the carcass midpoint, and as the carcass swings open on the spine, they scan the rib face, and they scan it with a special camera, or they use the human eye to judge it, but nowadays increasingly they scan them with a camera. And essentially what they're scanning is the fat content of the meat.
Oh, wow.
So it's the marbling. And in the US, for example, it is entirely the criterion on which they decide whether meat is graded prime or select or choice, which are the top 3 grades of meat. There's about 6 or 7 others, which are all manufacturing grades, but those are the 3 that would concern a supplier like us.
Yeah.
And only 5% of all beef in America is prime, is graded prime. And it's the 5% that's got the most marbling in it. And then we discovered that the Japanese breed of beef cattle, the wagyu, are the breed that is genetically the most predisposed to store fat within the muscle and marbling, and that provides great flavour. And in America, there were some producers using a red Japanese wagyu cattle called Akaushi, and about 45% of their beef grades prime, and the rest of it all grades select. So all their beef, and they have 100,000 heads. So this is talking about a massive scale of wagyu beef farming in the US, which of course is an enormous agricultural producer, found that if you want to have the prime grades, which carry the premium prices, then you basically want to cross your cattle with a wagyu bull. So at that point we thought, that looks like a way of adding value and adding flavour to our products, and if we're farming for flavour, that must be the way to go. And so we set out to acquire wagyu genetics and to use those to improve the fantastic flavour that we already get in the native breeds, and to make that our point of difference and to pursue that with the chefs in the local community. 12 years later, we have about 15 wagyu bulls to cover the cows that we have, and the vast majority of the beef we produce is a wagyu-cross on a Sussex or an Angus or a beef short-horn cow.
And I can say, honestly, it's fantastic. Every time I keep coming back, the beef never disappoints. So you've obviously got something very right. And it's not just me that thinks so. I know that also you're in Michelin-star restaurants.
We are.
You're considered, I'd say, as a top supplier, even though we don't have those prime, select and choice gradings here in the UK. But I think the chefs that work with you already know that you are up there in that kind of scale.
We're certainly very lucky to now enjoy a reputation, and so we receive inquiries pretty well every week from chefs either moving role to a new place or starting up a new place of their own, or starting up a new place with someone else. Can we supply them? And still, unfortunately, after 12 years of trying to scale up, we struggle to say yes to many of them, but we do, and that's a fabulous position to be in. And that, in a way, is the great virtue of having a product which is a great quality, is if you've got a discerning customer, they appreciate it, then it kind of markets itself. And really our job is to just make sure that we can supply the quantity they want, and we can supply it at a consistent level.
It is something that I think a lot of people that haven't been as exposed to the food industry might not understand. When you mentioned earlier about the limousine cows and also the supermarkets and the price setting, this is actually a very simple fact of life, unfortunately, nowadays. Farmers are told what price their product will be bought at, and it has no bearing on the the cost of producing that product. No. And I've seen this in the north of France as well, where farmers have literally written off entire fields of produce because it's the price that they're being told that they will take their potatoes isn't worth it. So they literally plow whole fields of potatoes straight back into the land and just leave them to rot and to go back into the land, and they can't sell the produce. This is a real big problem, isn't it, in this space?
It is. I mean, essentially, the big 5 supermarkets control about 85% of all the food in Britain. So they have immense buying power, and essentially, exactly as you say, they dictate the price. So the farmers take all the risk, and the retailers tend to take all the reward. And if you look at the percentage portions of the price that people are paying in a supermarket for beef, the amount that the farmer receives is very small. And so they are in a very difficult position unless they are a low-cost scale producer. And even the biggest scale producers in this country, and the biggest farmer in the country is James Dyson. He isn't particularly a livestock farmer, he's more arable, but he does do some livestock. he could not hope to compete with the economies of scale of Brazil, where they're cutting down the forests to farm cattle. Essentially, they're mining the forest, so it makes it a low-cost production. Or Australia, where it's just vast amounts of land with relatively few people, or the United States of America, and indeed Ukraine. So, British farmers are in a very different place. We're highly regulated, we're on small scale, and we have to try and fight, for a premium price, really, whatever we do, against food that could be sourced from overseas. And the supermarkets are very capable of exploiting that, and notorious for it.
Yeah, it's very sad. And it's a statistic that when you say it there, but the top five supermarkets doing about 80-85% of the food that's on the average person's table, the average family's table, also terrifies me in the sense of the quality, because what you've said there in terms of the mass producing and to do things on scale, invariably corners must be cut. I don't want to say that, maybe that's the wrong way of positioning it, but corners have to be cut. But also, I can't believe that they're able to sustain those sorts of things by having great practices, by doing sustainable farming, or by re-engaging with the community or the land and things like that. Would you say that's fair to say?
Well, I wouldn't be total about that. I mean, universal about that. I think, to be fair to the supermarkets, they're not stupid. They realise that there is a market for premium beef, and they will supply it. And many of them, particularly at the higher end, will have fresh meat counters and have some excellent meat on there. So it's not an exclusive thing. And I think that the great thing about scale retailers is they have enormous power and they have enormous influence. Whether it's McDonald's or it's Tesco, if they say, you're going to change farming practices to serve the environment, to be truthful, they've got a lot more influence than the government with the subsidy schemes that they're imposing. If McDonald's want to change the world, they can.
Yeah.
If Tesco's want to change the world of farming, they probably can.
Would they if it changed their profit margins?
Well, ultimately they've both got shareholders to answer to, and they're not. They're not free to do perhaps what they would like to do themselves, but they do have positive benefits, and they are they're not evil. They're just very commercial, and they are in a difficult, tough fight themselves with other massive retailers, whether it be Aldi or Lidl or Walmart or whoever it might be from elsewhere in the world. So, it is the way of the world. It's a commercial world. All we've managed to do is to have some degree of control over our pricing and our own destiny by building our own markets and supplying direct, as opposed to through wholesale processes to get to the supermarkets.
And this is where, if I'm right in saying this, it was back when COVID first hit that you guys sort of changed a little bit how you were approaching the market by not just focusing on the trade, but actually opening up to the public as well. Is that right?
That's correct. At that time, we were supplying everything to chefs. I think we did a Christmas beef box, that was it, once a year. And then when COVID came, we had several bodies of beef hanging in a fridge, dry aging, because we dry age for 21, 28 days as our standard. And we, unusually for the beef industry, we dry age the carcass, which means, we had 3 bodies at least in the fridge. And the day Boris Johnson announced the lockdown, everybody sort of looked at each other and thought, what the hell are we going to do now? Because there's no restaurants and no bars to supply. And the following morning, the phone goes and it's the butcher, and he said, Andrew, you've got these 3 bodies of beef in the fridge, and I'm due to start cutting them tomorrow. What do you want me to do with them? And at that point, the reality of what had just happened sort of comes home, and I said, you just give us an hour and we'll think about that. And essentially, there was an absolute scramble, and I think pivot is the jargon word that people use. We sort of swung round, and Rachel and her brothers built a website for people to be able to order online, and she posted some social media on the Facebook, on the local Facebook group, and said, we've got beef which we're able to supply. If anybody's interested, please come to the farm on Saturday. We'll be open, between 11 and 4 or something. And we set up a table outside the workshop where we had a fridge. And basically we started supplying directs, and it was with some trepidation. We really thought we would be empty, that very few people would come. But thankfully 2 things were in our favour. One was you were only allowed to go out and to find food.
Yeah.
So people were allowed to come out and buy food. And secondly, many of the local community were extremely helpful and generous and shared on their Facebook groups. And so on the Saturday morning, we opened the gate and there was a queue within half an hour, and there were cars all the way around the yard, and people, came back each week for many weeks afterwards and encouraged us to carry on. And many of them would say to us, you should do a subscription model, or you must carry on after COVID. You won't stop, will you? And we didn't. We didn't do the subscription model, but we carried on with the online ordering and collection, and it has grown to be a significant part of what we do.
It's crazy to think that was 5 years ago already now. Almost to say when we're recording this, that lockdown was in it.
It is. And things have just evolved. We've had to be quite cautious. The investment required to get into retailing on top of the sort of farming operation and the direct wholesaling operation is quite significant, but bit by bit we've added to it. And so now we have a beef offer where you can order online and collect on a Saturday morning. You can just pitch up on a Saturday morning and buy beef direct, but also we're serving burgers and our cider on a Saturday at the same time, so people have got a reason to come. And we've built this cider shack, which has got a bar and it's got a kitchen attached to it, so we can actually service people and bring them to the farm and talk to them about what we're doing and allow them to wander around and show their family what cows look like and what fields look like. And we do events several times a year, and we do a farm walk during the event and so on. And so it's enabled us to not just supply chefs and kind of have some influence in that way, if you like, but also to have a conversation with people in the community about farming and beef and the ethics and the environmental story and the economics of it all. And generally people are very supportive of farmers in this country, and so it's been a joy to do that. And I would say we'd be very hesitant about ever giving it up, because it provides us with something that you don't often get as a farmer. Many farmers are in a very lonely role, really. They don't meet the general public, from one end of the week to the other.
Produce gets shipped off.
Produce gets shipped off. You load the cattle in a trailer and you shut the tailgate and you wave them goodbye, and that's the last you'd ever see of them. And you never hear any feedback. You never, good or bad. You have no dialogue with the end user. So we're very privileged in that respect, that we meet people, and when they say things to you like, once I've had one of your burgers, you're never going back, and once I've drunk your cider, I'm not buying any of that other stuff. And, that kind of thing is so satisfying. And it's a privilege to do. Yeah.
I think we're going to have to get the three bros on the podcast, aren't we, to explain to us just how good that burger actually is.
Yes. I mean, that has been one of the joys as well, because, ultimately I enjoy working with young people and allowing them and encouraging them and trying to help them sort of build their own future and their own business. And we were supplying mince to 3 young lads in Brighton for a period that Rachel had met just by coincidence. And they were trying to get a burger joint off the ground down in Brighton. And she talked to them. She had one of their burgers and she said, well, it's a pretty good burger, but have you ever thought about trying Wagyu mince? And they said, no, but we will. And they did. And anyway, long story short, we started supplying them. And then they lost the premises they were in, and they were looking for a premises. And we said, well, what about coming and helping out and, base yourself on a Saturday, open up and do burgers here. And long story short, that was 2 or 3 years ago now. And they've gone from strength to strength, and, they've become our largest buyer of Wagyu mince.
Yeah.
They're doing great. And, it's a pleasure to see young people do well.
And they're here every Saturday, 11 till 4, I believe.
4.
And you can grab a pint of Silly Moo cider, which is fantastic as well, on the tap. And you can get one of their burgers, which I highly recommend.
Good, yeah.
Genuinely. So as part of the show, obviously, every time we try a product from yourself. Now, today was a bit different because I figured asking you last minute to bring out a piece of beef might cause a bit of a challenge in terms of what we were going to eat. So I've taken away a piece of cheek that was provided, and we've cooked that down, so nice and slow cooked. We're going to grab a plate, we're going to try it, and we're going to get your honest feedback.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed you approve of the recipe that we've come with. And then we'll talk a little bit about the product at the same time as you can tell us a little bit about the challenges maybe that you've had over the past few years of farming. So we've done slow cooked beef cheek with a red wine jus for you to try. Hopefully you can tell us what your thoughts are. But I will then ask you about the piece of meat, because I think there's lots of people that kind of veer away from things like when they have names like cheek, which I think is a shame, but we can talk about that in more detail. Please, help yourself. Tell me what your thoughts are. Actually, this is my first time trying this, even though, so I have taken a bit of a risk. Never been as nervous in my life. I don't think it's.
Well, you've nothing to be nervous about. Firstly, you're a Frenchman. Secondly, you used a superb piece of beef. You've slow cooked it and you've added red wine jus. I mean, what's not to like about that? It's a delicious piece of beef, very well cooked, lovely texture. I like cheek because it has a grain to it. So it's a very nice cut of beef, but it needs to be cooked slowly for long enough. Yeah. Which that has. Beautiful.
Oh,
thank you. Yeah,
happy
first
about
rate. Well done.
that.
First
Yeah,
rate.
so
Yeah.
the next guest will eventually get to try some of your beef. I haven't figured out what I'll cook for them yet, but hopefully they'll also appreciate it.
Delicious.
But I do think this is something that's huge, and actually I think this is why we chose to sit next to this as well, because there are so many different cuts, and I think most people, maybe not most people, that's unfair. Lots of people don't know about some of these cuts, or if they saw it, they would maybe hesitate and walk away from something like cheek, which actually is phenomenal. Like you said, slow cooked, it has so much flavor, it's tender. So, I mean, we can't actually show this on camera very easily, but you don't need to cut this meat. It literally falls apart by itself. And that's something really special about that as a piece of meat. I think it's well, yeah, what do you say to people?
Well, it's like pulled beef, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
Without the pull. Well, I mean, the great thing about the beef animal is that there is a whole variety of textures and to some extent flavors within the meat. I mean, some of it is very lean, some of it is more fatty, which tends to bring more flavor. Some of it has, more cartilage in it, and that sort of renders down if you cook it slowly. Sliced shin, brisket, they produce fantastic slow cooked beef. Other cuts are obviously suitable for flash frying in the pan and so on. I think, many people are intimidated by beef beyond certain cuts that they know, and actually, that is a shame. But it's quite interesting when you talk to restaurants. Actually, many chefs have a challenge with beef, which is that it's a relatively expensive meat, and the reasons for that are the cost of production are high. Beef cattle are a fantastic animal in the sense that they can convert a very tough foodstuff that humans could not eat, i.e. grass and forage. They can digest cellulose because of the rumen, which is like a bacterial fermenter. So they produce beautiful meat which we can eat from produce that we couldn't. On the other hand, they take a long time doing it, and therefore they are very expensive to produce, and beef is relatively an expensive cut. If only people would choose chicken all the time, chefs might be happier because the price of chicken relatively is low. And so they make more money crudely on selling a cut of chicken in a restaurant than they do beef. But they find it very difficult to take beef off the menu because it's such a popular choice. And many chefs that we supply will say, well, if I put your beef on the menu and I say it's Trenchmore beef on the menu, it will be the best selling item, and it will be the most expensive, and it will still be the best selling item. So in that respect, I think what people are doing is they're choosing to eat beef which they'd love to eat. They're nervous about cooking it at home perhaps, but they'll certainly eat it when they eat out.
You don't want to ruin a very expensive piece of meat, I'm guessing as well. No. Maybe that's what goes through people's minds.
I think that's partly it. And partly, as you say, the different cuts are slightly intimidating, and people fall back on the ones they know. The burger is a very stable, reliable cut, but so sirloin steaks and fillet steaks and so on, very easy for people to know what to do with that and to cook it. And generally speaking, they won't have a problem with cooking it. It's very hard to get it wrong. And you can overcook it, you can undercook it, but
somewhere in the middle is usually good. But this actually might help me. My wife and I constantly have this argument. So I believe that the ribeye is the best steak, and she believes that the fillet is. And going back to your idea of the fat, the marbling brings flavour to a steak, for me, that is true. And the ribeye is so flavoursome because of that. And I've always found fillet steaks a bit bland, even though they can come across as a far more expensive even piece of meat in a restaurant or anything else. Settle the argument for us.
Well, it's horses for courses. I mean, the interesting thing is that the fillet is a relatively it's a muscle that's not used much, and so it's very tender. The rib is similar, it's not used much, and so it's also tender, but it also has a relatively high fat content, whereas the fillet tends not to. Although with the wagyu-cross, you do get marbling within the fillet. And I think in that respect, it's an example of where the wagyu-cross actually brings something to the party that you cannot get just from a straight Angus or a straight Sussex cow. But fillet is soft, and the number one criterion I think for people choosing beef is they do want it to be soft. They don't want to sort of chew away for ages. And that's why, slow cooked braising cuts can be, a great success. If you've got the confidence to cook them, they aren't difficult to cook. Even stew with diced beef, just cook it long and slow, it will be as tender as anything. And fillet is a very tender cut of beef. Ribeye tends to be slightly firmer and slightly fattier. And, we've unfortunately got a situation in the UK where the supermarkets for many years sort of taught people that fat was something to be feared and sold beef that was the leaner the better and priced leaner beef more at a premium than fattier beef, whereas actually the fattier beef tends to be the beef with the most flavour. And, thankfully chefs aren't influenced by that, they're influenced by flavour first, and they tend to support, what we're trying to do really.
So what's your personal favourite cut?
I'd be a ribeye man with you. I'd go for the ribeye too. It's hard to beat a good ribeye steak. But the flat iron is a fantastic steak. It's less common. There's not nearly as much of it in a carcass, so that's one of the reasons it's less common. But particularly with the wagyu-cross, the flat iron and the Denver, which both come out of the shoulder, are intensely marbled with fine veins and marbling. And as a result, they are really juicy, tender, beautiful cuts of beef. And if you haven't tried flat iron steak, then you really want to give it a go.
Yeah, and your Denver steak, I think if I can cut to a clip of cooking this on a very special barbecue, but it is immense as well. The flavour comes through all the way.
Beautiful
It's very, very nice.
Yeah.
Well, to go with this, very luckily today, we've got a bit of Lennersley family vineyards and their Brut, which they've provided very nicely for us to try.
Fantastic.
And I know that obviously your beef actually goes to their Interlude restaurant as well. So it's part of the bigger Lennersley family. But what we're going to do is we're going to grab a glass of that and see how well it pairs with I did tell them we were going to be eating some beef, so hopefully it'll pair very well.
Very good.
So what they have provided us with today is the Brut Reserve.
Honestly, I'm telling a lie. I think I would have drunk all their wine at the at Interlude.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you probably would have tried some of the Benguela Cove.
Yes,
Reds
it
as well.
was. They had a wine flight with the meal, and it was magnificent.
There you go then. So here we've got Lennersley to go with some Trenchmore beef.
Right.
And hopefully this isn't too
I have
bad.
to move this out of the way. We better talk before I eat
that out of the
it.
way.
Before I devour all the beef. I've got an empty saucer.
Well, I'm going to give this a go to see how well they pair. I just need a little bit of the
my God, yeah.
a little bit of the beef.
The jus is very delicious. Well done.
Little Bordeaux red.
I expect nothing less of a Frenchman. And Bordeaux red is my favourite French wine too.
There you go. You see, it was all meant to be. It's all come together perfectly. Well, cheers, Andrew. Here's to Trenchmore. Many more years to come. To Lennersley, thank you very much for the wine as well, and to see how well these go together. There's something very good about Sussex specifically, but English sparkling wines.
That's delicious. That is really delicious.
And I say that's up there.
It's got that biscuity
flavour-wise.
malolactic fermentation, secondary fermentation. It's got that biscuity, delicious.
It is good, isn't it?
Very good.
But you see, I put that, and as a Frenchman saying this, I might get shot, and my dad might be very upset and disappointed with me. But I could happily put that alongside most champagnes, and I'd say that's as good a drink, and it goes as well with a lovely meal like that as anything else out there.
Yes. Well, the local climate is suited to producing the right grape for sparkling whites, and there are a number of producers now in Lennersley. They've got good experience from their vineyards in South Africa. They're really on top of the game. It's lovely.
Their winemaker, I believe, Johan, I'm hoping I don't get that right, wrong. But their winemaker, Johan, apparently still oversees everything, and he comes over from South Africa to do that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there about the climate as well. it seems like as there's a kind of wave coming upwards and going north, whereby the south of France at the moment is finding it harder to produce for the Côte de Provence areas. Champagne starting to see struggles potentially as well, and it could get worse, or they're expecting it to get worse. And actually meaning that we're coming up to the stage of getting the perfect weather to support sparkling wines, which I think is something amazing.
You can see the evidence for that with the alcohol content of still wines, which is just progressively getting stronger and stronger. It used to be Bordeaux red would be 12.5%, and nowadays it's 13.5 to 14.5%. It's very difficult for them to control. The sugar content of the grapes is so high because they get the sunshine. In stark contrast to us last year. It had no sunshine, it was cloudy all year, and it was very hard to produce a decent crop of grapes or apples in our case, or grass indeed.
Adam did say that they don't expect 24 to be
Be
a
a
very
vintage
good
year.
year, which is a shame. Before we wrap up, Andrew, are there any challenges that you've come across over the years with farming, and whilst you've been doing this, that you've had to sort of overcome, or things in particular that come to mind that have been, I don't know, harder than you thought, or maybe even more silly than you thought in some ways?
Well, I think if you didn't like challenge, you wouldn't be a farmer. There's a challenge every year, which is that the weather's never the same 2 years on the trot. And sadly, human nature is we kind of extrapolate from what we had last year and think it'll be the same again this year, and of course it never is.
Or at least hope.
So that always, we hope. So that always brings a challenge. I mean, I think the big challenge of the time really is to try and balance three things for us anyway, in terms of the beef side of the farm. One is the ethics. I want to have high welfare cattle. I want to treat them well. I want them to have a good life and a good death. And in that respect, that brings certain challenges. And trying to balance that with the economics of beef farming, and to farm kindly to the cows, kindly to the land, and still make a profit is always a challenge. And the environmental side of things is very much in our minds. Cattle produce methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas. You've got to do something about that. And the sort of the regenerative agriculture approach that we are adopting and have adopted here has actually helped mitigate some of that by capturing carbon out of the air and trapping it in the soil and replacing the carbon that was knocked out by arable farming for all those years. So in that respect, we're trying to deal with that, and at the same time, all the pressures of rising costs. Farming has been particularly hit by rising costs because many of the things to do with farming require energy. Synthetic fertilizers, which we've not totally eliminated, but we've drastically reduced our consumption of through regenerative agriculture, through farming mixed species grasses, which need less fertilizer. But that is a very intensive energy product, and so that's why we've tried to get rid of it. The prices of that have effectively doubled in time. The price of fuel, the price of people, the price of everything really just goes up and up and up. And we're all familiar with it through the cost of living that we all face every day. So that, I suppose, is the number one challenge really, is trying to balance those three things: the ethics, the environment, and the economics.
A tough balance to try and find.
Well, I think we're doing a job of it. I wouldn't say it's never easy, but we're making a reasonable fist of it. And as a result of the success of Trenchmore beef and the quality of it, we're in this kind of nice position to be in, but still a challenge of people wanting to buy more of the product than we can produce. And so trying to expand with limited area of grass has led us to partnerships with other farmers, and we send our bulls out and they cover their cows with our wagyu bulls, and then we buy the calves back when they're weaned from their mums or when they're yearlings or whatever. And that's allowed us to sort of scale up to some extent. And that in itself is a challenge. You're constantly negotiating and working with other people and communicating and trying to organize things and spreading out geographically and spreading out your sources of supply and trying to get consistency in the way that they're fed so that they actually produce a consistent product for the chef, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a lot of plates to spin, which is part of the fun of it, and at the same time it keeps you busy. There's never a dull day, that's for sure.
Keeps you out of mischief. That's good.
Yeah.
Andrew, for anyone who hasn't been to Trenchmore, what would you say? Tell them to come down. How should they find out more?
I'd say they're very welcome. Come on a Saturday between 11 and 4, take a look around, sample the produce for yourself. Go online, trenchmore.co, and you'll find all the meat that we've got available and the cider too. You can order online and collect it on a Saturday, or you can just turn up and see what we've got in the fridge.
And I highly recommend that as well. So come down, see what's happening 11 till 4 every Saturday. And hopefully you'll get to meet Andrew, and if not, your daughter Rachel, Nev, who's also in the yard.
Yes.
And there's plenty of you around that can direct you to the right place.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.